Petyr Baelish stood on the windswept ramparts of the Eyrie, the vale stretching out below him in a tapestry of grey crags and evergreen forests. He let the wind whip at his cloak as he watched the falcons circle high above the peaks. A small, satisfied smile curved the corners of his lips. Although the path ahead was treacherous, he felt oddly at ease here, far above the intrigues and sorrows of the world that lay beneath him. His mind, however, rarely rested. Plans spiraled with every breath he took, and in this moment he was plotting perhaps his boldest gambit yet, the reclamation of Winterfell under his own guidance with Sansa Stark as his bride. The union would solve so many vexing problems, so many illusions that needed to be maintained. And in time, no one would question whether he had the right to rule the North. If the plan came to fruition as he intended, no one would remember a time when Petyr Baelish had been little more than a whisper on the Council of King's Landing. One day, they might even forget he was not born of the North. He descended from the ramparts and passed through the tall, arched corridors of the Eyrie with measured steps. Each quiet footfall seemed to echo through the heart of the stronghold. The Vale was his base of power now, its knights loyal to him through young Lord Robin Arryn. The boy was pliable, easy to mold, though prone to his tantrums. Petyr had made certain the lad believed every good thing in his life was courtesy of Uncle Petyr. The staff and guards knew full well that Petyr Baelish had become the true ruler here, whatever Lord Robin's technical title might be. But the Vale was not enough. Even the bravest falcon eventually must descend to the fields below. His eyes were set further north on the seat of House Stark, an ancient fortress that had outlasted countless winters. If he was to see his influence spread over all the 7 kingdoms and to weave every thread of power in the land, Winterfell was vital. For in Winterfell lived the memory of the great House Stark, the guardians of the North for centuries. If he controlled Winterfell, he would have the North. And if he had the North, he would hold an anchor of stability the rest of the realm could not ignore. Sansa was waiting in her chamber when he arrived. She wore a simple but finely tailored gown of deep blue, which reminded him of her Tully heritage. The garment accentuated her tall, graceful figure, but she was no longer the shy girl who once dreamed of courtly romance. Petyr saw in her a lingering sadness, an unspoken caution. She had learned from the cruelty of Joffrey, from the chaos in King's Landing, from the nightmares she had survived among the Lannisters. And he knew she had grown wiser each day by his side. Yet, the memory of her father's honor, the loyalty she had once shown to the memory of Lady Catelyn, still dwelled in her, shaping every uncertain smile on her lips. A single candle burned on a side table, the faint glow turning Sansa's red hair into an auburn halo. She looked at him with wide, watchful eyes. "I've spoken to our allies," he said softly, letting none of his triumph slip too eagerly. "They are amenable to the plan. Our departure for the North will happen as soon as the snows permit a safe passage. The Vale's strength will move with us." Sansa's expression tightened with concern, but she did not ask him to reconsider. She had voiced her reservations often enough. She knew this marriage was a matter of necessity. It was a shield, a way to keep her out of the hands of men like the Boltons or the Lannisters. It was also, Petyr insisted, a means to secure her birthright. Still, Sansa was not blind to what Petyr wanted in return. They both understood that this was an act that bound them together in ambition and secrecy. Even if the union made her uneasy, she saw the logic in it. "Are you certain this is what you want?" she asked at last, her voice low and guarded. "What we want?" She exhaled as if bracing for an answer that might affirm her fears. Petyr approached her slowly, taking her hand. His voice was gentle. "My dear Sansa," he said, "I desire only your safety and comfort, and I believe our arrangement will grant you the security you deserve. Together, we can restore the North to its former glory. No more cowering under the names of usurpers. This is your home. This is your right." A flicker of quiet determination moved behind her eyes. She was tired of being a pawn passed between men, tired of waiting for someone else to save her. If she had to endure this, she wanted some measure of real power, her rightful place as the daughter of Eddard Stark. With her jaw set, she gave a small nod. "Very well. I will marry you. But do not make me regret it." Petyr's lips curved into a slight smile. "You will not regret it, my lady," he whispered, and in that moment he thought of how close he had been to Catelyn Tully so many years ago. He saw ghosts of the past shimmering in Sansa's fine features, but he pushed aside any flicker of sentiment. To rule the North required a calm heart. To secure her hand required his cunning. He guided her toward the candlelit table, the hush between them filled with the promise of a shared destiny. They left the Eyrie in early spring. Warmth was returning to the passes, making travel feasible, though winds still howled along the high ridges. Knights of the Vale rode at the head of the column. Behind them followed baggage trains full of gifts and supplies, enough to impress or bribe whichever northern lords they encountered. Lord Robin remained in the Eyrie in the care of Maester Coleman and a trusted retinue, for his health was as fragile as ever. Peter explained that traveling to the north's cold wastes might harm the boy, but everyone knew the deeper reason. Robin was far too capricious to be introduced to the labyrinth of northern politics. Peter required efficiency, not the chaos of a child's complaints and demands. Winterfell loomed in the minds of every soldier as they trudged along the winding paths. Tales of the castle's partial destruction during the war lingered. They said the great keep had been burned, that the stone walls were blackened and battered. Yet still it stood, defiant through the long winter. Sansa rode near Peter's carriage, a silent figure wrapped in a thick fur cloak. The Knights of the Vale formed a protective escort around her, quick to lower spears at the first sign of threat. Although House Stark's banner no longer flew from the battlements, the weight of that history suffused her. Sometimes, when she looked at the horizon, her breath caught as she thought of her father or her brothers. She could almost see a young Robb Stark on the training grounds, sword in hand, laughing as snow dusted his auburn hair. The memory was sharp enough to sting. Peter watched her closely. Whenever he sensed her sorrow might overwhelm her, he steered their conversation to matters of strategy. He spoke of the northern houses who might oppose them, House Serwyn, House Manderly, House Glover, and how they might be won over or neutralized. He murmured of alliances with the Knights of the Vale, of gold to be sent to those who needed it, of carefully chosen words to soothe old wounds. This was how he masked his quiet exultation, by draping it in layers of caution and concern. For no cunning man reveals how close he is to the triumphant moment until it arrives. They reached the outskirts of Winterfell in the midst of a mild snowfall. The castle's walls, rebuilt in part but still scarred, rose against the dull sky. Sansa's breath came in ragged gasps. She remembered the gates where she had once been kissed on the forehead by her father before her journey south, so many years ago. He had told her to keep her kindness, that the north was a place of honesty and steel, and she had taken that to heart. Peter placed a hand at her elbow, guiding her horse forward. His voice was soft with an undertone of command. "Let us greet your people." The small folk and scattered families who had taken refuge in Winterfell looked on, some with hope in their eyes, others with deep suspicion. Word traveled swiftly, the rumored return of Sansa Stark, wedded to Lord Baelish, arriving at the gates with a column of knights. Whispers drifted through the courtyard. Was this the rightful Stark lady, or another pretender? Did she bring war or peace? Wolves had once howled from the battlements here, but since the wars, the howls had fallen silent. Peter wasted no time in extending courtesies. He distributed food supplies from the baggage carts, ensuring each family had a share of barley, salted pork, and dried vegetables. He saw to it that medicines were passed out as well, caring for those weakened by the cold and the hardships of war. He made promises in front of them. To rebuild Winterfell, to restore peace and prosperity to a land ravaged by unending conflict. And all the while, Sansa stood by his side, the fur-trimmed cloak of House Stark draping her slender shoulders. She thanked each person for enduring. She reminded them that House Stark's blood was alive in her veins, that she was here at last to honor the memory of her father and mother. Some eyes shone with tears, others remained guarded. But in that courtyard, seeds of acceptance were planted. One by one, Peter summoned the lesser houses and bannermen to gather in Winterfell's great hall. There he showed them Sansa, unveiled in the seat of her ancestors. He called upon them to pledge fealty to the Lady of Winterfell, who had returned home at great personal cost and who, with her new husband, would stand as the shield of the North. The pledges did not come easily at first. Lords like Wyman Manderly and Galbart Glover cast wary glances. But Manderly recalled the bond that had once joined House Manderly and House Stark in friendship, and his doubts began to melt. Glover, grim-faced, questioned Sansa about her intentions. She met his gaze head-on, recalling the stories of her father's honest dealings with the Glovers, and swore she wished only to protect them from further strife. Gradually, with each meeting, tension loosened its grip. Murmurs of acceptance took hold. A cautious respect emerged. Peter let Sansa's natural grace speak for her. He positioned himself as the supportive consort, ever protective of his lady's rightful claim. But behind closed doors, he worked ceaselessly, forging alliances with those families who remained hesitant. He spoke to them of how the Lannisters had abused the realm, how the Boltons had sown terror across the north. He promised that, with the Knights of the Vale, Winterfell could never be captured again by outside forces. And he let slip certain sums of gold and silver into the coffers of those who needed it. An investment in our future, he called it. And the lords listened, some with gratitude, some with reluctant acceptance. Few men could refuse coin when their lands were in need of every advantage after years of war and famine. The wedding itself was a modest affair, held in the gods' wood beneath the ancient weirwood tree. Snow dusted the branches as the two stood before the carved face, its red eyes seeming to watch them with unblinking scrutiny. No grand festival was possible in such times of hardship, but the quiet ceremony brought together the northern lords and the Knights of the Vale, forging a pact as real as any written contract. Sansa, wrapped in white and gray furs, recited the words in a voice that trembled slightly. Peter's hand was firm around hers, his smile faint and reserved. She remembered a different wedding day in King's Landing, one that had filled her with dread, one where she had felt like a caged bird. This time, though she might still feel the weight of fear and uncertainty, she sensed a measure of resolve in her heart. If she was to endure, let it be here, under the red leaves of her father's gods, on the soil her ancestors had walked for thousands of years. When the vows were complete, the watchers let out a subdued cheer. A hush seemed to envelop Winterfell, as though the old castle were holding its breath to see if this union might break the cycle of misery. Peter and Sansa then dined with their guests in the great hall, which had been cleared of debris and was lit by rows of torches. The thick walls seemed to hold the warmth in a tight embrace, and the ring of cups and cutlery filled the air as knights and lords toasted their new liege lords. Peter rose at one point, remarking on the courage and resilience of the North, praising the unyielding spirit that had endured so many devastations. He addressed them with polished courtesy, letting his voice carry sincerity when he thanked them for accepting Sansa as their lady, and by extension, him as her consort and protector. The moment tasted sweet upon his tongue, for it was the culmination of so many years of maneuvering. Sansa excused herself early from the feast, though it was hardly a riotous occasion. In the corridor leading away from the hall, she paused to look upon the remnants of old tapestries, scorched in places. She ran her hand over the charred threads, recalling the days she had listened to Septa Mordane's lessons about the great houses woven into those images. Now everything felt so distant, so changed. Peter joined her, resting a gentle hand at the small of her back. "Does it displease you to see the castle like this?" he asked. "It saddens me," she admitted, "but as long as I stand within these walls, I'm reminded that my family's legacy still lives." "And it shall continue, my dear," Peter said, his voice low. "Winterfell shall thrive again under your guidance. I have given you that chance, and I expect you will not let it pass." She looked up at him, reading the undercurrent in his tone. "I will do what is necessary to protect my home. But do not mistake me for a fool, Peter. I know how you operate. Just remember that my father's blood runs in me." His smile was knowing. "I am well aware." They became a united force in the months that followed, each playing a role in the tapestry of the North's slow revival. Peter took command of the logistical aspects, sending out riders to invite more farmers and small folk to settle in the lands around Winterfell, ensuring they were well fed and that their dwellings were secure. He struck bargains with traders, enticing them with the promise of Vale security and coin. Word spread that Winterfell was rising from the ashes, that a new power was forming there, guided by the cunning of Peter Baelish, and the Stark daughter returned from exile. Sansa devoted herself to winning the hearts of the Northerners by more traditional means. She walked among them, listened to their woes, and took genuine interest in the hardships they had endured. Sometimes she would stand in the godwood for hours, answering the pleas of farmers who had lost livestock or wives who had lost husbands. She sought to mediate disputes that might otherwise fester, taking counsel from Lady Barbary Dustin, who had complicated loyalties, and even from the younger lords who were trying to rebuild their family's fortunes. With each gesture, she invoked the memory of House Stark's honor. And over time, the people began to see her not as the frightened girl from King's Landing, but as a woman grown, steady, and gracious. In private, Sansa and Peter's interactions were guarded. She recognized the ambition in his gaze, the slight twitch of satisfaction whenever a new alliance was secured. But he was attentive, never letting her feel unprotected. He shared secrets with her, half-truths, at least, about the lords who might be coerced into compliance. He instructed her on how to flatter them, how to gently press them into corners where they had no choice but to pledge loyalty. And Sansa, for her part, shared stories of her childhood that might help them forge connections to the North's older families. In that sense, they became co-conspirators, each learning from the other. A fragile trust grew between them, grounded in mutual necessity. Perhaps there was some lingering remnant of Peter's old affections for Catelyn that he transferred onto Sansa, but he was careful not to let that overshadow the practical reality of their relationship. As the harvest season approached, Winterfell's courtyards bustled with activity. Peter orchestrated an elaborate recrowning ceremony, a symbolic reaffirmation of Sansa's place as Lady of Winterfell, recognized by the northern houses. He invited the faithful lords and ladies who had already bent the knee, as well as those who still hesitated. The ceremony was held in the Great Hall. Sansa stood at the dais while Peter stood a step behind her. Torches flamed along the walls, casting flickering shadows. Lord Manderley arrived with a small retinue, and Lady Dustin graced them with her presence, looking every inch the wary observer. Others followed, House Serwyn, House Ryswell, House Tallheart, among others. They watched in silence as Sansa took an oath to uphold the honor of the North, to protect its people, to ensure that justice reigned within these walls. Peter spoke at length of the North's independence of spirit, how it required strong leadership that understood both resilience and cunning. He hinted at old alliances that might be renewed to maintain peace. And then he bowed to Sansa, addressing her as My Lady of Winterfell. The lords and ladies, faced with the might of the Vale and the renewed sense of purpose in House Stark, bent their knees. Manderley's booming voice led the pledge, echoing in the rafters. Sansa could hardly breathe, so profound was the weight of that moment. She heard the words of loyalty ring in her ears, and she tried to remember the last time she had felt such a sense of belonging. Perhaps back when she had been a child in these same halls, playing with Arya or singing songs of knights and heroes. Their rule was not uncontested, of course. Rumors spread that distant northern holds resisted or questioned the legitimacy of Sansa's claim. Some recalled the king in the north, Robb Stark, and the horrors that befell him at the Red Wedding. They wondered if the north had lost its last real wolf. Peter took these rumors seriously, dispatching envoys to meet with the more stubborn bannermen, offering them incentives. Some needed gold, others needed marriages for their children, and a few needed only a promise of revenge against some old enemy. Whatever the cost, Peter was prepared to pay it, so long as the result was unwavering loyalty. In council sessions, he would quietly brief Sansa on these developments, letting her know where the weak points lay in the network of fealty they were building. She listened, occasionally challenging him if she felt he was pushing too far. But she could not deny that his methods bore fruit. Each day, the seed of House Stark grew in power, and with it, their hold on the north. As summer's warmth touched the land, caravans began to arrive from the south. Some bore exotic wares, spices, fine silks, and precious metals. Others brought updates from King's Landing, whispered accounts of political unrest, maneuverings by other houses, rumors of Daenerys Targaryen across the sea, or of a Lannister queen perched uneasily on the Iron Throne. Peter listened to these travelers intently. One evening, after a day of hearing the latest southern tidings, he took Sansa aside and explained his conviction that the North must be prepared for any southern storm that could blow their way. It was better to keep the realm's conflict at arm's length so that Winterfell could continue to grow in strength without being drawn into pointless wars. For her part, Sansa felt a pang of anxiety whenever she heard news of the Lannisters. She still had nightmares of King's Landing and the tyranny she had endured there. But here, in her father's fortress, she sensed a renewed will inside herself. She would never again be a powerless piece in someone else's game. She had Peter's cunning at her side, and though she did not fully trust him, she believed she could guide him with her own sense of honor. If the time came when the South demanded their subservience, they would find the North much changed from the days when Eddard Stark had bent the knee. The difference now was that Sansa understood the power of alliances and illusions. With the Great Keep partially rebuilt, Peter saw fit to enlarge Winterfell's garrison. He recruited young men from across the north as well as seasoned fighters from the Vale. They drilled in the courtyard daily, their discipline growing under the watchful eyes of northern veterans who had survived the War of the Five Kings. Sansa would sometimes observe from a balcony, standing near the spot where, as a child, she had watched her brothers train in archery and swordplay. The clang of steel against steel rang through the keep, a reminder of what kept them safe. The soldiers wore a new sigil upon their surcoats, the direwolf of House Stark beside a golden mockingbird discreetly combined to mark the alliance of Stark and Baelish. Some northerners quietly grumbled at the bird's presence, but none dared speak openly against it, not while Peter controlled the flow of gold and resources. In time, emissaries came from White Harbor, the second largest city in the north and the seat of House Manderley. They brought gifts of fish, silver, and a grand tapestry depicting the old gods of the north. Sansa stood beside Peter as they received the emissaries. The leader, a knight of House Manderley, spoke respectfully, praising Lady Sansa's return and voicing his lord's gratitude for the newfound stability. Peter responded graciously, offering trade agreements that would benefit White Harbor's shipping lanes and promising a mutual defense pact that would strengthen both seats. Sansa watched him negotiate, impressed despite herself at how smoothly he handled each demand and proposal. He was weaving a web of alliances that extended well beyond Winterfell's walls, and the Lords of the North were stepping willingly into the strands. Yet not all alliances came so willingly. House Glover, still nursing old wounds and grudges from the wars, was slower to bend. Their castle, Deepwood Motte, had suffered under Ironborn raids and northern infighting. While they recognized Sansa's lineage, they bristled at Peter's hand in northern affairs. Lord Glover, a stern man with a scar across his cheek, came to Winterfell to deliver a carefully worded complaint, suggesting that too much southern influence threatened the North's independent traditions. He spoke with cold courtesy, but his disapproval was plain. Peter, unfazed, suggested a marriage between one of Glover's daughters and a minor lord of the Vale, sealing a bond that would protect Deepwood Motte from future Ironborn aggression. Lord Glover agreed to consider it, though the flinty look in his eyes did not soften. Later, Sansa told Peter that they needed to address the root of the Glover family's concerns, the fear that the North would be lost to foreign rule. Peter nodded, promising to find a way to appease them, though he did not reveal his exact plans. Conflict of a more violent kind arose as well. A band of outlaws, remnants of Bolton soldiers perhaps, took to raiding villages in the hills west of Winterfell. They murdered a local reeve and carried off supplies meant for the rebuilding effort. Peter quickly dispatched a contingent of knights and loyal northern warriors to hunt them down, led by Ser Vardis Egan, a seasoned knight from the Vale. Sansa insisted on sending a Stark retainer along, to ensure justice was done in accordance with northern laws. Within a fortnight, the outlaws were found and put to the sword, their heads mounted on pikes outside the city gates as a grim warning. Peter took no pleasure in the violence, but he made sure the tale was spread far and wide. Winterfell would not tolerate lawlessness or threats to its people. The message resonated with the small folk, who began to speak of their new rulers with a measure of relief. Perhaps, they murmured, this was the kind of firm hand the North had needed since the demise of Robb Stark. As the year progressed, trade flourished. Small markets sprang up around Winterfell, and caravans ventured further, carrying northern pelts and timber to the Vale. In exchange, the Vale sent grain and carefully crafted steel weapons. Peter made sure to handle the finances, meticulously taxing transactions but redirecting much of the revenue into the restoration of roads, watchtowers, and granaries. He wanted to cement his legacy as the man who rebuilt the North's infrastructure, ensuring that every village eventually owed its livelihood to his benevolence. Sansa occasionally found herself awed by the scale of his ambition, but she also recognized that each improvement benefited her people. The North was growing stronger, and the name Stark was once again spoken with reverence. Sometimes, Sansa would wander alone through the corridors of Winterfell at night, recalling the rooms where she had once studied needlework, the courtyard where she had fed the hounds with her siblings. She felt the ghosts of her childhood trailing her. Arya's laughter, Bran's eager questions, Rickon's toddling footsteps. The pain of their losses was a constant ache, but with each passing day, she could breathe a little easier, knowing she was honoring their memory by not letting Winterfell crumble. When she passed by the crypts beneath the castle, she would imagine her father's statue, sword across his lap, watching over them all. She would pray silently to the old gods, asking for guidance, for a sign that she was doing the right thing by working with Peter Baelish rather than defying him. One evening, Peter found her in the crypts, standing before Eddard Stark's resting place. He approached quietly, his footsteps echoing in the gloom. Sansa did not turn to face him, but she did not flinch either. I often come here, she said. I feel closer to my family when I do, but sometimes I wonder if they would be proud of the decisions I've made. Peter's voice was gentle. Your father loved you. He would want you to survive. And survival in these times requires more than a kind heart. It requires cunning, strategy, the ability to see what others cannot. Sansa pressed her lips together. That was not my father's way. He exhaled softly. Perhaps not. But it is the way the world has become. And you, my dear Sansa, are evolving with it. I respect you for that. She turned to him, eyes glinting with some inner fire. He was a good man, a better man than you or I will ever be. I don't want to forget that. A slight smile curved Peter's lips, though there was sadness in his eyes. Nor do I. Though they shared that moment of understanding, neither could deny that the North's present peace hinged on a delicate balance of fear, loyalty, and calculated generosity. If Peter felt any pangs of conscience, he buried them beneath layers of reasoning. He was building a bastion of power that would hold the realm's attention for years to come. Even if the Iron Throne wobbled under Lannister rule or fell to some new claimant, the North would stand firm, commanded by a cunning lord and a resilient lady. Word spread beyond the narrow boundaries of the region that Winterfell was once more a place of influence and stability. If not the seat of a king, then a fortress worthy of respect. In time, an emissary arrived from King's Landing, bearing a scroll sealed with the royal sigil. Peter received it in his solar, with Sansa at his side. The King's Landing envoy, a droll man in fine silk, delivered polite greetings and inquired after the well-being of the North. He spoke in carefully chosen phrases, suggesting that the crown recognized Sansa Stark's inheritance and wished to maintain friendly relations. Peter read between the lines. The Lannisters wanted to keep an eye on Winterfell's growth, perhaps even control it from afar if possible. He responded with equal diplomacy, expressing gratitude for the crown's acknowledgement, while making no promises of fealty beyond the usual courtesies. Sansa sat still throughout the exchange, her face calm. Only her eyes revealed a flicker of anger at the memory of her time in King's Landing, but she held her composure. After the envoy departed, she turned to Peter. They think to manipulate us. We'll not be pawns again. He nodded. Indeed not, my lady, but let us keep them believing they hold some influence here. That illusion is often more useful than defiance. She said nothing to dispute that. In her heart, she knew that defying the crown openly might bring the wrath of the Iron Throne down upon them. Better to keep up the facade of polite submission, just as her father had once done under King Robert until he discovered the truth about Cersei's children. Sansa shut her eyes momentarily, pushing away the wave of memories. This was not King Robert's time, nor her father's. This was her rule and Peter's. As the seasons turned, the North continued to fortify itself. Peter urged Sansa to host a great harvest feast, inviting all lords, landed knights, and significant freeholders to celebrate the region's newfound prosperity. The invitation extended to the surrounding areas, and the response was overwhelming. Dozens of northern houses sent representatives eager to see for themselves the wonders rumor claimed Winterfell was becoming under its new leadership. Long tables were set up in the courtyard where barrels of mead and ale were tapped, and the smell of roasted boar and spiced carrots filled the crisp autumn air. Musicians played pipes and drums, and for a few days, Winterfell felt alive with laughter and celebration as though the long nightmares of war were finally receding. During the feast, Peter weaved through the crowds, greeting lesser nobles with a courteous nod, complimenting local leaders on the improvements they'd made to their lands, subtly pressing them to align themselves ever more closely with Winterfell. Sansa, meanwhile, took the more visible role of hostess, smiling graciously, ensuring each guest felt seen and appreciated. She chatted with Lady Manderly about new textile patterns, listened sympathetically to Lady Dustin's complaints about a land dispute near Barrowton, and applauded when a group of young men performed a traditional northern dance. In these moments, she realized that she had come a long way from the girl who only wanted to marry a handsome prince. Now, she was forging bonds, shaping destinies, balancing on a knife's edge between loyalty and fear. One evening, during the festivities, she slipped away from the crowd, seeking a moment's peace near the old well in the courtyard. Peter found her there, the torchlight bathing her face in a soft glow. "You did well tonight," he said. "The lords and ladies are enamored of their gracious hostess." She let out a long breath. "I'm simply trying to do what I must." "Perhaps you were always meant for this," Peter mused. "The swirl of politics, the gentle currents of persuasion. You navigate them with more ease than you realize." She turned to face him. "I learned from the best, didn't I?" His smirk was fleeting. Flatterer. In that half-lit moment, she could see the ambition in his eyes more plainly than ever, like a burning coal that never cools. But she also caught a glimpse of something else, something wistful, almost mournful. She wondered, fleetingly, if he was remembering her mother or the life he might have had if fate had dealt different cards. The thought unsettled her. They lingered for a moment, neither quite trusting the other but bound so tightly that there was no space to sever the link. After the harvest feast concluded, Winterfell sank back into its routine of steady governance. The nights grew colder, and small flurries of snow signaled the onset of another northern winter. But this time, the people were prepared. Peter's careful provisioning and Sansa's concern for the welfare of her subjects ensured that stores of grain and salt beef were sufficient to weather the freezing months. The great hall remained warm, heated by the ancient hot springs under the castle, providing comfort against the biting winds. Lords from distant holds sent messages praising the improvement of roads that allowed trade wagons to travel more easily despite the snowdrifts. Peter's plan for the north was working. He had taken a land battered by war and sown it with enough gold, order, and favor to make it flourish. And Sansa, blossoming in her role as Lady of Winterfell, gave the entire enterprise a legitimacy rooted in the Stark name. Late one night, as snow fell gently in the courtyard, Peter sat alone in his solar, reviewing ledgers and drafting letters to potential southern allies. He heard a soft knock. He opened the door to find Sansa, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She stepped in quietly, closing the door behind her. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "The wind has been howling outside my window." Peter gestured for her to sit near the fireplace. "It's the northern wind welcoming winter once more. Is that all that troubles you?" She looked into the dancing flames. "Sometimes I dream about my family. I see them in these halls, alive and laughing, and then I wake up and it's just me. And you." His face softened. "It's not just you. You have the entire North rallying behind your name." "That's not what I meant, and you know it," she said, eyes glistening. "I miss my mother, my father, my brothers. I don't want to lose their memory in all this maneuvering." Her voice cracked slightly and she took a steadying breath. "We are successful, Peter. The North is stronger than it's been in years. But at what cost? Are we losing ourselves to become what we need to be?" He set aside the parchments and came to kneel beside her chair. "Sansa," he said quietly, "I loved your mother in my own way. And I promised her I would protect you. But I also learned that love alone can't overcome the cruelty of this world. Power can, or at least it can shield us from some of that cruelty. You once believed in the songs of knights and ladies, in a world where valor triumphs over villainy. But the reality is that cunning often triumphs over innocence. Yet here we are, using cunning to protect the innocent, your people. Perhaps that is the best we can do." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words wash over her. "You speak the truth, even if it's hard to hear." He rose to his feet and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are the Lady of Winterfell, and I am your devoted husband. Together, we can ensure the North stands, no matter what threats emerge from King's Landing or beyond the seas. And if, in time, we need to do more, if we need to be the ones who decide the fate of the Iron Throne, then we will make that decision together." She stared at the flames, imagining distant kings and queens, dragons, and armies that might one day march upon the North. She thought of her childhood illusions, torn to shreds in King's Landing, and how she had survived everything to stand here, alive and unbroken. Slowly, she nodded. "We'll face it together," she said, her voice a soft affirmation of the only truth she could hold on to. Another winter came, harsh but survivable. The newborn alliances endured, tested by wind and ice. Outlaws, ironborn raiders, and the lingering supporters of House Bolton all found themselves with nowhere to hide in a land united under the watchful eyes of Stark and Baelish. In the flickering candlelight of Winterfell's halls, agreements were forged, disputes settled, and old feuds laid to rest. The North, once a battlefield soaked in Stark blood, began to know a new era of stability that felt almost like prosperity. The lords who had once grumbled at Peter's presence now recognized that his cunning was a shield against a realm that had often dismissed the North as remote and insignificant. But now, remote and insignificant no longer. The North had money, it had soldiers, and above all, it had will. Emissaries from the Riverlands and the Stormlands visited to see the changes. They reported back tales of how Winterfell had been transformed under the joint rule of a Stark and a Baelish, how roads were now safer, how trade was thriving. The Vale, too, boasted an influx of wealth from its partnership with the North. Peter's private agents brought him updates from King's Landing. Tensions at court, shifting loyalties, whispers of external threats. He cataloged each piece of information, carefully calculating the potential consequences for Winterfell. Always, he aimed to keep Sansa informed, though he filtered the news to maintain her trust and ensure she never saw the extent of the manipulations he orchestrated behind the scenes. Occasionally, Sansa challenged him. She insisted on transparency in dealing with the Northern Lords, on making sure they were not squeezed by excessive taxes. Peter indulged her to an extent, knowing that her good name was crucial to maintaining the genuine loyalty of the North. He let her be the benevolent figure, the ideal that people rallied behind, while he remained in the shadows, tying off loose ends. Their partnership became a dance of negotiation and compromise, and in that dance they found a rhythm that seemed to benefit both. Their union produced no children in the first few years, a fact that some northern lords noted in hushed tones. Whispers arose that perhaps the marriage was more political than personal, or that fate had chosen not to bless them with an heir. Sansa felt the pressure each time a lady asked after her health or an old lord offered a folk remedy for fertility. Peter, for his part, was discreet about his private affairs. He let the rumor stand that they were simply waiting for the right time. Perhaps it was a subject they both avoided delving into too deeply for reasons that simmered in their unspoken thoughts. Sansa still wrestled with the traumas of her past, the fears of being used, while Peter, perhaps, remained too fixated on his grand ambitions. Whatever the reason, they shared a bed but kept a certain distance, a deliberate caution that neither openly addressed. Through it all, the North remained unwavering in its renewed identity. The common folk who had once cowered beneath tyrants and uncertain allegiances now tilled their fields confidently. Merchants built new stalls in Wintertown, the small settlement just outside the castle walls, drawn by the prosperity filtering down from on high. Fortified outposts in the wilderness watched for any signs of invaders or rebellious remnants. And under Sansa's insistence, Peter created an office dedicated to caring for orphans and war widows, paying a monthly stipend from Winterfell's treasury. He grumbled about the expense in private, but he recognized the political capital it garnered. The White Wolf's Mercy, they called it, though no official name was ever given to the initiative. People simply began to revere Lady Sansa for her compassion, and by extension they tolerated Lord Baelish's involvement in their governance. Some nights when the moon was high and the corridors were empty, Peter would steal away to the ramparts. He would gaze out over the snow capes, the outlines of the towers, the shimmering glow from the windows of the Great Keep. He recalled the first time he had truly set his mind on controlling this ancient stronghold. In those days, Sansa had been a frightened girl with no power, just a precious name that he coveted. Now, she was a woman shaped by grief and endurance, her name no longer just a key to the North but a banner that drew men to her cause. He found himself strangely proud of her transformation, even as he remained careful to keep her from outgrowing his influence. He had to maintain a balance. If she ever suspected just how many strings he was pulling, just how far his designs reached, would she stand with him or turn against him? One particularly cold winter morning, the yard bustled with excitement. A group of travelers had arrived from the far north, beyond the last hearth, with news of wildling movement near the wall. They came wrapped in heavy furs and carried tidings that a new group of free folk was seeking to settle in abandoned lands south of the wall. Sansa called an emergency council to decide how to handle the matter. Peter stood at her side, listening as the travelers described the wildlings' desperate condition. Some lords advocated turning them away, remembering old blood feuds. Others argued for caution, pointing out that the wildlings could become valuable allies if properly integrated. Peter's mind leapt at the potential. If they offered these free folk safe passage and a place to settle, it could bolster the North's population and provide more soldiers for Winterfell. But he also recognized the risk of straining relations with certain conservative lords. He leaned in and murmured to Sansa, a calculated acceptance may yield strong results. Let us be cautious yet welcoming. They'll owe us a debt of gratitude. She considered his words, thinking of how her father had once held an open heart for the wildlings, recognizing their humanity amid all the fear. She remembered how Jon, her half-brother, or so she had believed, had tried to make peace with them. With a measured tone, she told the council that Winterfell would send envoys to meet these free folk, establish terms, and ensure they were integrated in a way that did not threaten the local populations. Some lords protested, but Sansa reminded them that winter took lives without caring for allegiances. She would not see families starve on her doorstep if it could be avoided. Peter watched her expertly navigate the discussion, bridging the gap between compassion and pragmatism. When the council concluded, the majority agreed to her plan, swayed by her quiet resolve. The travelers departed with promises of aid, carrying the Stark name back to the edges of civilization. In the weeks that followed, messages flew back and forth, culminating in a small delegation of wildling representatives at Winterfell. Sansa personally oversaw their welcome, ensuring they were granted warm chambers and fed hearty meals. Peter stood by, observing the ripple of gossip that spread among the courtiers and knights. But he also noted the wildlings' gratitude, saw how their leader, a grizzled man with streaks of gray in his braided hair, thanked Sansa for her mercy. It was another subtle victory, a piece of the puzzle that would make Winterfell an unassailable center of influence, not just in the north but perhaps across the Seven Kingdoms. The pace of events quickened as more visitors arrived with tidings of shifting alliances in the south, of rumors that a Targaryen claimant had landed on Dragonstone, of the Iron Fleet stirring in the west. Through it all, Peter counseled caution, urging Sansa to refrain from making any hasty declarations of loyalty. She agreed, for she had learned to move carefully in this dangerous world. The North was still healing, and though they commanded respect, an open war with a southern power could jeopardize everything they had built. Some nights, Sansa lay awake, wondering if they should not prepare for a grander ambition, reclaiming independence for the North fully, as Robb had once declared. But she felt a weight pressing down on her, the memory of how that ended for Robb. She thought of Peter's warnings: war would only come at a steep cost in blood, and if they could maintain de facto independence by holding Winterfell's power discreetly, wasn't that better for the people? One cold dawn found her standing alone at the castle gates, watching the sky lighten from black to gray. She recalled Arya's fierce spirit, Bran's curiosity, Rickon's laughter, and Jon's resolute kindness. Each was gone from Winterfell in a different way, leaving her to carry forward the Stark legacy. She closed her eyes, exhaling a plume of frost. She wondered if they would approve of the choices she had made, the marriage that cemented the North's power, the daily compromises she accepted to keep her people safe. A part of her ached to think that none of them could see her now, shaped by trials and forging alliances with a man she would once have feared. But as she gazed upon the courtyard, hearing the muffled sound of soldiers stirring, merchants unloading goods, and the faint ring of a smith's hammer, she knew Winterfell was no longer the quiet place of her childhood. It was alive with purpose, humming with possibility, and that was something she was proud to have helped create. When Peter joined her by the gates, cloak pulled tight against the cold, he said nothing at first. They stood side by side, surveying the fortress that had become their joint domain. The tension between them, the shared history, the unspoken future, all stretched before them like the endless northern horizon. At length he spoke. "You haven't asked me about my next moves, Sansa. Are you no longer curious?" She turned to him, her breath misting in the morning air. "I know you have plans, Peter. You always do. But for once, I don't feel the urgency to pry. We are safe here, stronger than we've been in a long time. Whatever designs you have on the rest of Westeros, I'm content to let them unfold slowly." He studied her face, searching for hidden meaning in her words. Finally, he nodded. "As you wish, my lady. But understand, the game is never truly over. We've only created a sanctuary, a platform from which we can steer our destinies. If we rest too long, others will move while we remain still." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Then let them move. We'll be ready." They stood together as the sun broke over the horizon, gilding the newly placed banners on the walls, banners that bore the dire wolf of House Stark in equal prominence with the mockingbird that Peter Baelish had chosen as his sigil. In that dawn light, Winterfell appeared almost reborn, its scars hidden by fresh snow, its future uncertain yet brimming with potential. Two figures, once bound by fragile trust, now governed this land with a mixture of resolve, cunning, and a quiet determination to survive no matter what storms might come. And though no one could say how the histories would record their reign, for now the North stood strong and proud under their careful rule as winter's chill gave way to a new day. Peter Baelish watched the receding night from Winterfell's ramparts, the final stars blinking out in the graying sky. Dawn's pale light revealed columns of faint smoke rising from the chimneys below, the comforting stirrings of a fortress beginning its day. The banners of the direwolf and the mockingbird swayed gently, half-shrouded by thin, drifting snow. Sansa Stark had already gone inside, footsteps echoing along the corridor as she returned to her solar. In a moment, Peter would follow. For now, he closed his eyes and let the crisp morning air wash over him. He could taste the North in every breath, cold, bracing, and quietly defiant. He reflected on all that he and Sansa had accomplished. The North was no longer a land of scattered allegiances and simmering distrust. Bit by bit, they had brought order. Roads were safer, trade was profitable, and the common folk felt less afraid of war's returning specter. Rumors from the south spoke of tensions at King's Landing and the uncertain hold of the Lannisters, but so far those troubles belonged to another world. Here, Peter possessed authority that few lords in history had ever managed to wield over these rugged territories, all courtesy of the Stark name and his carefully nurtured alliances. Sometimes he felt the faint pang of triumph well in his chest, an exultation he tried to mask with the cool veneer of calculation. Yes, he had come far, but he was not fool enough to believe the game was done. He descended from the ramparts, footsteps echoing on stones still dusted with ice. Servants bowed as he passed, addressing him as my lord, or, more formally, Lord Baelish. He accepted their deference with the faintest nod. Once in the corridor near Sansa's private chambers, he paused to compose himself. He reminded himself that she was not the same girl he had rescued from King's Landing. She had grown into her role, layering her inherited warmth with the flint of resolve. In that sense, she had become a true daughter of the North. Still compassionate, but tempered by steel. He could see in her a caution and watchfulness that might rival his own. On occasion, he was tempted to think she could outmaneuver even him if his guard ever slipped. That possibility roused in him both a thrill and an undercurrent of unease. He rapped softly on the door and waited until her voice called for him to enter. Inside, a basin of steaming water stood near the fireplace, and Sansa was methodically washing her hands and face, her hair pinned back to keep it from getting wet. She turned briefly, offering a small smile of acknowledgement. "The day begins," he said quietly. "Are you ready for your meetings?" She nodded. "I have a council session with several of the lesser lords who've come to Winterfell for the winter. You'll attend?" "I will," he answered. "But I'll let you lead most of it. Better that they see you at the head of the table." He watched her expression shift ever so slightly at that, a flicker of appreciation mixed with a lingering wariness. They both understood that he was at her back, always whispering, always guiding. The question that hovered unspoken was how fully she trusted where he guided her and how fully he trusted that she wouldn't one day pull away. Before they could speak further, a servant arrived with a breakfast tray, fresh bread, a wedge of cheese, and a pot of hot spiced wine. The smell teased the winter-chilled air. Sansa gestured for Peter to partake if he wished. He accepted a cup of the wine, feeling its warmth slide down his throat. For a moment, they stood side by side, quietly sharing the simple fare. The hush was oddly comfortable. Sansa broke the stillness. "We'll have to discuss that matter of the new settlement for the free folk. Our envoys report they've begun building longhouses near the gift, but the Crown's envoy in White Harbor has signaled some displeasure about such leniency. Apparently, word reached King's Landing that we're giving lands to wildlings." Peter sipped his wine thoughtfully. "The Lannisters are jealous of any domain they don't directly control. They'll be looking for an excuse to undermine us. But we're well within our rights to settle that territory. It's part of the North, and the king on the Iron Throne, whoever he claims to be at the moment, has no direct authority to forbid you from allocating your own lands, especially lands that have seen no southern presence for decades." She considered his words. "Still, it might cause tension if they decide to leverage it. We can't appear to be flouting the crown. Not openly. I've no desire for an invasion from the south." "Invasion?" Peter let out a soft chuckle. "They barely have the forces to keep King's Landing in check, from what my sources tell me. Their finances are stretched, and the realm's attention is drifting to stories about dragons returning. Nobody wants another northern campaign. Not after the horrors of the war." Sansa nodded, though her brow remained furrowed. "Perhaps you're right, but we should be vigilant. If we need to placate them with formalities or courtesy, so be it. Better that than to see the North forced into a costly conflict." "As you wish, my lady." He waited to see if she had anything more to say, but she merely set aside her meal and gathered her cloak. Together, they left her chambers and made their way to the council room. The corridors were busier now, with stewards' assistants carrying messages, kitchen servants rushing about to prepare midday meals, and a few knights already heading to the practice yard. Sansa greeted them with a polite nod, and Peter observed how their faces lit with a certain loyalty at seeing her. It was the Stark name, a name that resonated with centuries of northern history. Peter knew he could maneuver behind that name, use it as a shield, but he recognized the intangible power it held that even coin could not buy. In the council chamber, long wooden tables surrounded a central brazier. Several men and women rose to attention when Sansa entered, bowing their heads in respect. Lord Manderley's steward was there, along with a knight from Deepwood Motte, an elderly representative from House Serwyn, and a cluster of smaller landholders. Old Lady Barbary Dustin had come as well, sweeping into the room with a regal bearing, still wearing the black and gold attire that marked her ties to House Dustin. She offered Sansa a faint inclination of the head, ignoring Peter altogether, a small slight he had come to expect from her. Once greetings were exchanged, they settled into the day's business. Sansa called upon each representative to speak of any pressing concerns in their territories. The steward from White Harbor highlighted shipping routes that needed further security in the winter months, particularly to ward off any reaving ships from the Iron Islands. The knight from Deepwood Mott offered a mild complaint about the wildling settlement near the Gift, while Lady Dustin mentioned bandit troubles on the roads south of Barrowton. Sansa listened carefully, responding with measured reassurances, turning once or twice to Peter for confirmation or advice. He supplied the needed details, mentioning, for example, that the Vale Knights patrolling the high roads could be redirected to guard White Harbor's trade lanes, or that funds might be allocated to hire additional scouts to keep watch for bandits. He noted how carefully Sansa weighed each request, never promising more than she felt she could deliver, but offering enough to satisfy immediate concerns. When the subject of the Free Folk settlement arose, Lady Dustin raised her chin and spoke with calm severity. "My lady, I do not question your kindness, but these wildlings have never been integrated peacefully. Your father's efforts were noble, but—" Sansa's gaze flicked to her. "My father's efforts were cut short by betrayal," she said quietly. "We're in a different time. And if we do not stand together, we'll remain fractured, easy prey for whatever threat emerges next. I understand your doubts, my lady, but the Free Folk have shed blood beside Northerners before. Many of them fought with my brother, Jon Snow, to defend the wall. We cannot ignore that." Lady Dustin's mouth pursed as if tasting a bitter spice. "We are not ignoring it, my lady. Some of us only wonder whether forging an alliance with them now might lead to trouble later. The Crown's envoy in White Harbor is already sending messages south. Some in the north say we might appear rebellious or at least reckless." Peter offered a neutral smile. "Recklessness is a matter of perspective, but we won't let the Crown interpret it as a threat. Our intention is to keep the north strong and stable. If we show the Crown that these free folk will be quiet, productive settlers, any accusations of rebellion will ring hollow. After all, is it so different from how the Iron Throne grants new lords dominion over lesser lands? We're simply claiming what is ours to claim." Lady Dustin gave him a sidelong look, the tension between them an old, unspoken wound. "As you say, Lord Baelish, I suppose we shall have to wait and see whether this decision bears fruit or weeds." Sansa offered a brief, firm nod to close the matter. Discussion continued, drifting to minor disputes about fishing rights and supply routes. The council session ran longer than planned, but by its end, a sense of resolution hung in the air. Peter admired how Sansa had steered the conversation, firm on the main points, conciliatory on smaller ones, granting enough leeway to keep the lesser lords and ladies feeling valued. This was how you cultivated loyalty, by letting them speak, letting them feel that they had a role in shaping decisions. Peter might be the architect, but Sansa was increasingly the face of those designs. And the North, shaped by tradition, preferred that face to be a Stark's. When the meeting adjourned, Peter lingered beside Sansa as they made their way out, his voice low. "You handled Lady Dustin well. She might grumble, but she has no real recourse against us." Sansa shot him a sidelong glance. "I'm aware of her temper and her history with House Stark. Still, we shouldn't underestimate her. She has friends among the Ryswells, and that can be trouble if they unite behind her." Peter inclined his head. "I never underestimate a potential foe, my lady. But rest assured, I've kept lines of communication open with the Ryswells. Their ambitions lie closer to their own lands, and they stand to profit from the new roads and trade routes. They won't easily join her in open defiance." Sansa made a small, acknowledging sound. Together, they walked through the corridor where, outside the arrow-slit windows, flurries of snow whirled on the wind. In the courtyard below, Knights of the Vale were sparring with a handful of Northerners, the ring of steel rising in the cold air. Sansa paused to watch them. She sometimes wondered if these men still viewed each other as foreigners, or if they were forging the bonds of camaraderie that only come from shared blood and sweat. As they continued, a page hurried toward them. The boy dipped his head respectfully. "My lord, my lady, there is a messenger at the gates from the Dreffort." Sansa's countenance darkened at that old name, which still carried the taste of horror. The Dreffort had once belonged to the Boltons, and the memory of Ramsay Bolton's atrocities lingered like a stain in the North's collective psyche. Peter felt her tense beside him, but he kept his own voice calm. "Bring the messenger to the Solar. We'll hear what they have to say." The boy bowed and hurried off. Sansa said nothing, but Peter could sense her disquiet as they made their way back up the stairs and along the corridors. The solar was warm thanks to the well-tended fire in the hearth, and the messenger waited there, a gaunt, middle-aged man wearing a threadbare cloak. His face was etched with lines of worry, and he clutched a small pouch in his left hand. He knelt hastily when Sansa and Peter entered. "My lady, my lord," the man said, voice shaking. "I come from the Drefort, though it is no longer so named. The new steward in charge calls it the Rook's Rest as Lord Baelish decreed. But we've troubles, as one might expect." Peter signaled for the man to rise. "You may speak freely." The messenger licked his lips and cleared his throat. "Winter has tested us these past moons, my lord. The old crypts were rumored to hide leftover men loyal to the Boltons, or at least men who served them. The new steward tried to ferret them out, but tensions have flared. A series of raids occurred, cattle stolen, small folk frightened away from the fields. At first, we couldn't prove who was responsible. But just a fortnight ago, the steward's men found a group of them with Bolton sigils hidden in their packs. They were planning something bigger. The STE. Ward asks for more soldiers or coin to quell the unrest before it spreads." Sansa glanced at Peter, remembering the savage cruelty the Boltons had visited upon her family and upon the entire North. "The lands once sworn to House Bolton have always been rife with fear," she said quietly. "We can't let that fester." Peter nodded. "The Drefort Rook's Rest, as we've tried to rename it, remains a vulnerable area. The Boltons built their power base there over centuries. Even if we put a new steward in place, old loyalties die hard. We'll need to send a strong signal." "And that signal would be?" Sansa asked, searching his face. He paused for a measured moment. "A small garrison of knights from the Vale, combined with some northern men who hold no love for the Boltons, ought to suffice. We'll root out any hidden pockets of resistance. The steward must be made to feel supported, otherwise he'll be forced to compromise with the old families still loyal to the Boltons. That we can't allow." Sansa turned to the messenger. "Tell your steward that support is coming. We will not abandon those lands to rebels." The man visibly sagged in relief. "Thank you, my lady. Truly thank you. We feared we were forgotten." Peter allowed him a thin smile. "You're under the protection of Winterfell. You'll never be forgotten." He reached for the pouch in the man's hand. "Is that for us?" "Yes, my lord." The messenger placed it carefully on a side table, untying the leather thong. Inside lay a scrap of cloth, the flayed man of House Bolton scrawled in cheap paint. Peter felt a faint twinge of revulsion, though he kept his face composed. The messenger continued, voice trembling. "They left that behind to warn us. They said more would come." Sansa's eyes hardened as she looked at the cloth, old memories of terror flickering behind her gaze. In that moment, Peter could almost sense the swirl of her anger meeting the chill of her old fears. "Burn it," she said softly, "and we'll make sure they have nothing left to threaten us with." The messenger bowed. "Yes, my lady. I'll await your instructions for the garrison." He made his exit, head bowed in respect. Once the door closed, Sansa turned toward the fire, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Peter approached carefully, his voice gentle. "The North remembers, as they say, but so do the darker corners. We'll stamp out any remnants of the Bolton name." She exhaled slowly. "They took so much from us, from me. Sometimes I think I've set it aside, and then I see that sigil again, and it all comes rushing back." He reached out, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. She didn't shrink away, but she didn't lean into him either. "They are ghosts. The last Bolton was flayed himself by Stannis, or so we're told, and his bastard son died after betraying you. What remain are only the dregs. They cling to a ruined name." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, we'll deal with them." He studied her profile in the firelight, the determined line of her jaw. "We will." Within the week, Peter organized a contingent of Vale Knights, 50 lances under the command of Ser Albar Royce, a distant cousin of Yohn Royce. He paired them with a northern detail led by a grizzled warrior who had once fought for the Karstarks but who now served Winterfell. Peter set them marching north and east, carrying letters of authority, promising swift justice to any who still raised the Bolton banner. Sansa personally saw them off from the courtyard. The men knelt as she gave a brief speech reminding them that the safety of all the North depended on their courage and honor. Peter, standing off to the side, watched how her words resonated with the ranks. A decade earlier, she would have been a timid girl stammering in front of an assembly of soldiers. Now her voice was calm, deliberate, each phrase chosen to invoke the memory of House Stark's guardianship. When the men rode out, Sansa stood atop the battlements, her cloak snapping in the wind, gazing after them until they vanished over the horizon. That night, she and Peter shared a private meal in his solar. The room was modestly furnished, a small table spread with roasted vegetables, salted fish, and warm bread. Peter poured them each a goblet of wine, the color rich and dark in the flickering candlelight. Sansa set her hands around the cup but did not drink immediately. She seemed pensive, as though uncertain where to begin. "You're quiet this evening, my lady," Peter observed gently. "Only thinking," she replied, "about the future. We've spent so long rebuilding, quelling rebellions, forging alliances. I wonder when we'll have enough stability that I can just breathe." Peter sipped his wine. "Power is never truly stable. But if you're asking when we can allow ourselves to find some semblance of peace, perhaps soon. The North is strong, well-fed even in winter, with trade routes humming. Only scraps of defiance remain. It's more unity than this land has seen in years." She exhaled a small sigh. "I know. Yet sometimes I fear a new threat is always waiting just beyond the horizon. Another war. Another betrayal." He studied her carefully over the rim of his goblet. "That fear might keep us vigilant. We can't let it consume us, but we shouldn't discard it either. The moment we grow complacent is the moment the game changes." She finally took a sip, her gaze drifting to the flames in the hearth. "Perhaps the next threat won't be from within. What if it truly comes from beyond the wall? There are stories of creatures in the far north, the others, White Walkers, things most Southerners dismiss as fairy tales. But I recall old Nan's tales from my childhood, and I know my brother John took them seriously." Peter pressed his lips together. He had never witnessed such creatures, but he knew rumors of them had grown. "If there is such a threat, the Night's Watch hasn't reached out to us, at least not yet. Their numbers are small, but if they believed we were in immediate danger, they would send ravens. For now, let's consider it a distant possibility, overshadowed by more tangible dangers. Still, we keep an ear to the ground. If the watch calls, we'll respond." Sansa nodded, setting her wine aside. "I hope that day never comes. But I also can't forget my brother. John once believed the greatest danger would come from the north, not the south." Peter drummed his fingers on the table. "John is rumored to be somewhere beyond the wall, or perhaps with the wildlings. If he's alive, he's yet to show his face in the north in any official capacity. If he does, we'll see what role he might play. He is, after all." He let the words drift, uncertain how she would respond. John was, by all accounts, the son of Eddard Stark, though the realm was rife with speculation about his true parentage. Peter had gleaned some of that secret, but whether or not Sansa knew the depth of it, he was not entirely sure. It was a dangerous piece of knowledge, one that could topple certain claims if brandished at the wrong moment. Sansa's voice was subdued. "Yes, he is my brother, and part of me still wants to find him, to know how he fares. But the rest of me is frightened of how everything might change if he returned. You and I have built something here, something real. Where would he fit into that? I don't know." Peter watched the swirl of conflicting feelings cloud her face. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "We need not worry about that unless it happens. Life has taught me not to lose sleep over every hypothetical. We have enough on our plate in the present." She tightened her fingers in his for a moment, then withdrew her hand, as though suddenly conscious of the intimacy. "You're right," she said softly. "We'll focus on what's before us." They finished the meal mostly in silence, each trapped in their own reflections. When she rose to leave, Peter escorted her to her chamber door. She paused there, looking at him in the torchlight, and he sensed a question in her eyes. Maybe she wondered if they truly had everything under control, or perhaps she wondered if she should trust him more or less. But no words passed between them. She slipped inside, and the door closed softly. Alone, Peter stood in the corridor for a time, weighing the intangible tension that had grown between them. Their union was an arrangement built on necessity and mutual gain, but somewhere beneath that, threads of respect and something approaching fondness had formed. It was a precarious mix, one that Peter recognized could shift in an instant if either felt threatened or betrayed. He retired to his own chamber, already planning how best to support the garrison heading to the Dreadfort, how to appease the Crown's envoy about the Free Folk, how to maintain the delicate balance that held the North in thrall. He fell asleep with the knowledge that each day was a chance to reinforce his position, while acknowledging that the slope he climbed was steep. One misstep and all could crash down. Time moved swiftly through another stretch of winter. Snowfall thickened across the plains and forests, but the roads remained passable thanks to the improvements Peter had funded. Mules and wagons continued to bring goods in and out of Winterfell, ensuring that hunger did not take root among the small folk. Reports trickled back that the new garrison at the former Dreadfort had subdued several bands of rebels, capturing or driving them out. Some of the Bolton loyalists were executed, their heads displayed on pikes as a warning. Others were taken prisoner, forced into hard labor. A few deserted altogether, presumably scattering into the wilds. With each victory, the seat that had once been the Dreadfort moved closer to becoming a stable hold, though Peter suspected it would take generations for people to forget the shadow of the flayed man. Meanwhile, tensions with the crown simmered but did not boil over. The envoy stationed in White Harbor complained in coded letters about northerly expansions, referencing the free folk settlement, but Peter had responded with equally polite, circular arguments. The Vale's official stance was that these were the Lady of Winterfell's rightful lands, and the free folk were under her protection, not the Vale's. Thus, King's Landing could not claim any direct violation of the crown's authority by Peter Baelish. It was a neat evasion, and every time the envoy pressed the matter, Peter would dispatch yet another courteous reply. Until the crown decided to dispatch an army, an unlikely move given their financial woes, there was little they could do. Winterfell's coffers, on the other hand, were steadily growing. The region's unity had spurred economic recovery, with trade caravans and shipping routes yielding increased revenue. Peter managed the funds with meticulous care, ensuring fortifications were strengthened, watchtowers repaired, and new storehouses built. He quietly employed more spies as well, scattering them throughout the north, the Riverlands, and even King's Landing when a safe route could be found. Information was the root of power, after all. Sansa, for her part, poured her energies into the welfare of the North's people. She had re-established a network of healers and midwives to assist remote villages. She ensured that grain distribution during the harshest weeks of winter was fair, preventing lords from hoarding for profit. She occasionally traveled with a small retinue, visiting nearby towns to see firsthand how well they fared. At each stop, the common folk welcomed her with a mixture of awe and gratitude, for it was rare indeed for a lady of Winterfell to mingle so openly. Peter noted how those visits burnished her reputation. Whispers among the small folk spoke of a new golden age for the North, perhaps an exaggeration, but a powerful narrative nonetheless. When Sansa returned from such journeys, she would sometimes share stories of the people she had met, widows who still lit candles for lost husbands, children who had never known a time without war. She found herself carrying their hopes and fears, and though it weighed heavily on her, it also steeled her resolve. The memory of her own suffering, first in King's Landing, then under the Boltons, made her all the more determined to see that no one else endured what she had. Peter saw a quiet fire in her, and he took care not to snuff it out with cynicism. That fire, after all, was part of her magnetism over the North. On a frigid morning late in the winter, a raven arrived bearing a letter for Peter. The wax seal was plain, but when he opened it, he recognized the coded signs of one of his informants stationed near the Trident. He read the words intently, each phrase carefully veiled. The gist was that skirmishes had broken out in the Riverlands, involving soldiers said to be in the pay of the Lannisters and some local resistance group. More interesting was the mention of men who might be loyal to House Targaryen. The letter suggested that a Targaryen banner had been glimpsed by a traveler, unconfirmed, but enough to raise eyebrows. Peter's mind flickered to the rumors that Daenerys Targaryen had landed on Dragonstone. If she truly had, was she forging alliances in the Riverlands? If so, that could change the dynamic with King's Landing and by extension with the North. He stepped away from the window to find Sansa, eventually locating her in the library with Maester Wolkan, poring over the genealogies of lesser northern houses. She glanced up when Peter entered, noting the seriousness on his face. She dismissed the Maester, who quietly bowed and left them alone. Peter offered her the coded letter, letting her read it. She did so slowly, her brow knitting with concern. "It seems the Targaryens aren't content to remain across the narrow sea," Peter remarked, folding his arms. "If even half the rumors are true, Daenerys Targaryen has brought dragons back to Westeros." Sansa's eyes widened slightly. "It sounds like old stories come to life. Dragons and Targaryens. I was raised on tales of the Mad King and how Robert Baratheon ended the Targaryen line. To see it revived, that complicates everything." How do you think it affects us? Peter paced quietly. Well, if the Lannisters perceive a genuine threat, they might become desperate. Desperate men make rash decisions. They could try to force the North's submission to bolster their strength, or they might try to levy heavy taxes. But if Daenerys is indeed waging war on the crown, we might consider the benefits of neutrality or even subtle cooperation with her cause if it would weaken the Lannisters. Sansa exhaled softly, setting the letter aside. The North has bled too much for southern wars. My father died in King's Landing, my brother and mother died at the Twins. I have no desire to send our men into yet another southern conflict. And yet, if ignoring this leaves us vulnerable to whichever side emerges victorious. Peter placed a hand on the back of a chair. We can position ourselves carefully. Offer no open hostility to the crown, but keep lines of communication open with Targaryen envoys if they appear. See who gains the upper hand. If the Targaryens prove they can unseat the Lannisters, we pivot to support them at the right moment, securing favorable terms for the North. If the Lannisters hold strong, we feign loyalty just long enough to avoid retribution. Sansa grimaced at the cold logic. So we lie and maneuver again. I know it's necessary, but I hate that the realm can't simply find peace. Peter gave her a somber look. Peace is often the product of exhaustion or thorough conquest, my dear. The realm isn't yet exhausted, nor is it thoroughly conquered. She made no reply, but the weariness in her eyes spoke volumes. After a long pause, she set her shoulders with renewed determination. Then we do what is best for the North. If that means biding our time, so be it. But I won't commit our forces to any alliance unless it's essential. He inclined his head. Wise. If Daenerys truly has dragons, it might be that her victory is inevitable. But dragons alone won't guarantee her a stable rule. She'd still need alliances and the resources to hold the realm. We watch and wait. Sansa agreed. She spent the next few days in conference with Peter and a small circle of trusted advisors, hammering out contingency plans. They discussed defense strategies in case of a forced levy from King's Landing or in case a Targaryen army marched north. They also considered how to handle the Vale should Lord Yohn Royce or other powerful figures decide to break from Peter's influence. For now, the Vale remained pliant, tethered by Peter's regency over young Lord Robin Arryn. But as the boy grew older, that hold might weaken. They prepared for that too. Every angle demanded a plan, every plan demanded a fallback. Sansa found the process exhausting but necessary. She saw now with greater clarity than ever that the line between safety and danger in the Seven Kingdoms was as thin as a razor's edge. Spring crept over the horizon. In the north, that meant the snows receded slightly, roads turned muddy rather than impassable, and the harshest bite of cold eased. Caravans from White Harbor arrived more frequently, bringing news of busier shipping routes and the first rumors of seafaring envoys from across the narrow sea. Word spread that Daenerys Targaryen had indeed taken up residence on Dragonstone, forging alliances with certain lords of the Stormlands and planning to strike at King's Landing. Nothing was confirmed, but the tension was palpable. One afternoon, as a light drizzle fell over Winterfell, Peter Baelish received a pair of unexpected visitors. They arrived on horses lathered with sweat, escorted through the gates by the watchers at the walls. Peter and Sansa were summoned to the Great Hall, where they found two men cloaked in gray, each bearing a sigil that Peter did not immediately recognize. Once they lowered their hoods, he realized they were not northern, nor from the Vale. One had dark hair streaked with gray, the other was younger, towhead, with a vigilant gaze. Both were lean, like men used to riding long distances. Sansa greeted them politely. "You've come a long way by the look of you. May I know your names and business?" The older man bowed stiffly. "My lady, I am Ser Willem Harklay of the Riverlands. This is my nephew, Andren Harklay. We come at the bidding of a friend, one who remembers the service your father once did for the people of the Riverlands during the war." Sansa's eyes flicked to Peter. She knew that her father, Eddard Stark, had once marched south to help end the threat of Gregor Clegane and to bring peace to the Riverlands. "Go on," she said gently. Ser Willem stepped forward. "We've heard that the Riverlands stand on the brink of new conflict. Soldiers loyal to the Lannisters clash with men rumored to be Targaryen loyalists, and it's the small folk who suffer. There is talk of outlaws rising again, though some of them claim to be righteous men fighting for a free Riverlands. Our friend wishes to know if the North would consider lending any form of quiet assistance, if only to remind the Riverlands that there is honor left in the world." Peter studied the man. "And who is this friend you speak of?" Ser Willem glanced at Sansa, then at Peter. "I cannot name him directly, my lord, but he is someone who walked under the banner of the Trout before the Red Wedding took it from him. He believes that if the Targaryens succeed, there might be a chance to restore the old ways in the Riverlands. But for that, he'll need allies. He recalls House Stark as a beacon of honor in days long past." Sansa's lips tightened. She knew that the last Tully holdouts had fled or been crushed when the Freys and Lannisters took Riverrun. Some had disappeared, rumored to be in hiding. "You want arms or men?" she asked quietly. "Or coin," said the younger man, Andren. "Just enough to help the common folk defend themselves or to escape the worst of the violence. Winterfell has more resources than any single lord in the Riverlands, thanks to recent improvements." He didn't say Peter's name, but the implication was there. Peter cleared his throat. "We have sympathy for the plight of the Riverlands, truly. But to intervene is no small matter. We risk angering the Lannisters, and if the Targaryens fail, then Winterfell would be in a precarious position." Sansa turned her gaze to Peter. "But if the Targaryens succeed and we do nothing to help those who remembered our father's honor, we might regret it. The Riverlands were our allies during the War of the Five Kings. They took in Robb's forces. They bled for us." Peter folded his arms. "A fair point, but we must move carefully. A direct dispatch of soldiers or large sums of coin might be traced back to us." Sansa hesitated, then addressed Ser Willem. "If we were to send discreet aid, grain, a small shipment of steel, coin enough to buy mercenaries or bribe troublesome lords, would your friend be able to ensure it goes to the right hands, that it truly helps the innocent rather than fueling more chaos?" The older knight's eyes gleamed with something like relief. "He would. He has a network of supporters. We can keep your involvement hidden. We only ask because we have no one else we trust." Peter interlocked his fingers, leaning forward. "And if we do this, what do we gain?" Ser Willem bowed again. "Gratitude. And if the Targaryens come to power, or if the crown's grip weakens, you'll have loyal hearts in the Riverlands who would remember how you aided them. Perhaps that will be of use to you in the days to come." Sansa weighed the words. "Let us speak privately," she told the visitors. "We'll give you an answer soon. In the meantime, you may rest in our guest quarters and your horses will be tended to." They bowed once more, then followed a steward out. When they were alone, Sansa turned to Peter with a questioning look. "What do you think?" He turned away, pacing a few steps, arms behind his back. "My instincts say that meddling in the Riverlands is risky, but it could yield rewards if the Targaryens topple the Lannisters. Or if, at the very least, we establish a small foothold of influence there. If the Riverlands are grateful, we can open new trade routes once war subsides." She nodded thoughtfully. "Yes. It might also be a way to repay old debts to the Tully line. My mother was a Tully after all. Though House Tully has all but fallen, the name remains in the hearts of some. If we can help them discreetly, that might restore a sense of justice." Peter's gaze softened momentarily at the mention of Catelyn Tully. "Indeed. Very well. We can arrange a small shipment of steel and coin. Not enough to strain our own resources, but enough to make a difference. We'll route it through a few intermediaries. No sigils. No documents. Let them take it south and distribute it quietly." Sansa set her jaw. "And we never publicize it. This must remain between us." He nodded. "Of course. We'll instruct our men to maintain silence." They spoke for another hour, ironing out details of how best to conceal their assistance. Peter had a network of merchant contacts who specialized in moving goods without raising suspicion. With careful planning, a shipment of steel swords, shields, and a modest sum of gold dragons could be funneled into the Riverlands. The Harclays need only collect the items somewhere near Moat Cailin, far from prying eyes. Sansa agreed to the plan, though she looked troubled by the secrecy. Peter reminded her that secrecy was often the best shield against reprisal in Westeros's ever-shifting politics. If the Targaryens failed, no one need know the North had tested the waters. When they summoned Ser Willem and Andren back, the older knight bowed in gratitude at their proposal. The younger man's face betrayed a cautious hope. "You'll not regret this," he promised, though the tension in his voice suggested he well knew the risk they took. Within days, they departed with instructions on how to claim the hidden aid. Sansa watched them ride out of Winterfell's gates, her mind swirling with possibilities. Was this the first step toward a deeper entanglement in the realm's brewing conflict, or just a small gesture to honor her father's memory? The question lingered as the spring thaw continued. Snow gave way to soggy earth, and the roads turned from slick mud to firmer ground. More travelers ventured to Winterfell, some drawn by the promise of trade, others by curiosity about the newly prosperous north. Peter quietly oversaw expansions to the fortress. A new granary, additional guest quarters, a modest augmentation to the walls where war damage had never been fully repaired. He also approved the purchase of more horses for the stable, anticipating that the north might soon need swift riders to dispatch messages in all directions. Amid these developments, Sansa found moments of unexpected solace. She visited the gods' wood more frequently, praying under the ancient weirwood. Sometimes she removed her gloves and placed her hand against the carved face in the trunk, as if seeking her father's spirit in the cool, rough bark. The quiet murmur of the hot springs running through Winterfell soothed her. She told herself that, for all the hardship and scheming, she was doing what she must to protect the North, just as her father would have. She could almost hear him urging her to remain kind and just, to remember that lords and ladies were meant to serve their people, not the other way around. One late afternoon, when the sky was tinged with the colors of an approaching sunset, Peter found her in the godwood. She was kneeling at the base of the weirwood, her cloak spread on the moss. She rose when she heard him approach, brushing leaves from her dress. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said softly. "I was told you were here and thought you might wish to hear the latest news." She inclined her head. "What news?" He exhaled, stepping closer. "Ravens have arrived from our contacts in the south. It's confirmed Daenerys Targaryen has allied with certain lords in Dorne and the Reach. They say she has 3 dragons that are fully grown, able to torch entire columns of men if unleashed." Sansa's eyes widened. "Gods! If that's true, King's Landing must be in a panic." "Indeed. But there is more. There are rumors that a northern figure, someone claiming knowledge of the White Walkers, has petitioned her to consider an alliance with the North, or at least to pause her war until the threat of the others is dealt with. My sources are unclear on who this northern figure might be. Some say it's a man who once wore black. Others say it's a Stark." Sansa inhaled sharply. "Jon?" Peter nodded, reading the fear and hope in her expression. "That is one speculation, yes. It could be your brother. If so, he's chosen a dangerous path, entreating a Targaryen to set aside her claim to the Iron Throne for the sake of the realm. Whether he's found success, I cannot say." She clasped her hands together, gaze flickering to the weirwood as if seeking counsel from its silent face. "If this is true, if Jon is alive and traveling in the south, I can't begin to guess what will come of it. We've heard no word from him." "That doesn't mean he hasn't tried," Peter pointed out gently. "Ravens can be lost, intercepted. Or he might be cautious, not wanting to draw attention to you here." Sansa took a moment to absorb that thought. The idea that Jon was negotiating with a dragon queen to fight the mythical White Walkers seemed almost too fantastical. Yet, from everything she'd learned, the realm had grown more unpredictable by the day. "If he's with Daenerys Targaryen," she asked carefully, "would that mean he's bending the knee to her?" Peter shrugged slightly. "Hard to say. Even if he is, would that matter to the North, so long as he's not challenging your leadership? He's taken no official step to claim Winterfell or your title." She nodded, though her mind spun with the complexities of that possibility. If he believes the White Walkers are real and approaching, he might do anything to secure help. He always had a strong sense of duty. And if that rumor spreads, Sansa, you might face pressure here. Some northern lords may wonder why you aren't also championing the cause of defending against these creatures. Particularly those free folk you welcomed south of the wall. They, of all people, might bring stories of the horrors they've seen. She fell silent, breathing in the cool air of the godswood. "I won't ignore the warnings, but until we have proof, sending the entire North into a panic helps no one. We can't just throw our forces into a war based on rumors." Peter nodded approvingly. "Prudent, but we can prepare quietly. Ensure we have enough dragonglass if the tales are true that it can harm the others, or at least stockpile steel. We can strengthen watchtowers along the northern road. Quiet measures that won't alarm the populace." Sansa gave him a measured look. "Yes, let's do so. And if we receive any direct word from Jon, or from Daenerys Targaryen, we'll consider next steps. In the meantime, we'll continue as we have, solidifying our hold, helping the North prosper, and staying clear of the war's front lines." Peter bowed his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Your will is mine, my lady." She looked away, a swirl of emotion rising. Perhaps in another life, she would not have had to share her rule with a man so adept at manipulation. But in this life, she recognized how his cunning had shielded the North from devastation, and how her compassion had tempered his ambition enough that it served them both. If Jon indeed walked in the South, forging alliances with a Targaryen queen, then the tapestry of their fates was becoming more intricate with each passing day. Over the next several weeks, Sansa began implementing discreet preparations. She authorized the forging of additional weapons, citing the need to ensure every holdfast could equip its defenders. She had a quiet conversation with the Maester about acquiring dragonglass from distant lands. Supposedly, the island of Dragonstone was abundant with it, but there were other deposits rumored in the world. She avoided making grand statements, choosing instead to bury these expenses in the general accounts of fortress improvements. Few lords questioned it. Those who did were given plausible explanations about wanting to be ready for anything after so many years of conflict. Peter supported these measures, though he never let slip whether he truly believed in the threat of the others or simply saw it as another angle in the game of power. In truth, it hardly mattered. Even if the White Walkers proved to be a myth, the weapons and fortifications would still serve the North in any future war. If they were real, then every sword and arrow counted. Another month passed before any fresh news arrived. This time, it came from the mouth of a ragged traveler who staggered into Winterfell's courtyard one afternoon, half frozen and babbling about an army of the dead. The guards brought him in from the cold, and Sansa, with Peter by her side, listened in alarm as the man recounted a harrowing tale. He claimed to have been a wildling who fought alongside Jon Snow beyond the wall. He had seen villages emptied overnight, corpses walking, eyes blue as ice. He had fled south in terror, crossing the wall with a group of refugees, only to become separated. Now he had reached Winterfell, desperate to warn them. Sansa felt her blood run cold as she listened. Peter asked the man for specifics, trying to distinguish rumor from truth. The traveler's voice trembled as he spoke of silent nights in which the dead rose, pulled from grave mounds or from the battlefield. He spoke of wights, skeletons, and rotting corpses guided by an otherworldly intelligence, and White Walkers, tall, pale figures with chilling blades. Sansa remembered old stories, half fanciful, half myth. Now, seeing the terror in the man's eyes, she could no longer dismiss them so easily. When the traveler had finished, Sansa dismissed the guards and turned to Peter. "He seems earnest." Peter nodded slowly. He might be mad, but madness doesn't always mean falsehood. The free folk have been telling these stories for some time. Jon Snow believed it enough to make alliances across the realm. If this is real, the North will face a crisis like none other. Sansa rubbed her temple, anxiety beating in her chest. We can't simply ignore this. If an army of the dead truly marches south, all these southern wars will be meaningless. Everyone will either stand together or perish. Peter's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes. The question is, how do we convince the northern lords, or the Vale, or the Crown that this is not just a fable? He paused, letting out a soft sigh. Perhaps we focus on the North first. Our people. We intensify the building of defenses quietly. We rally the bannermen, claiming concern about wildling raiders or some other plausible threat. Once they're assembled, we can address the possibility of the dead. But we'll need proof to unite them. Sansa thought of her father's unwavering honesty, how he might have announced the truth straightforwardly. But she had learned the hard way that politics did not bow to truth without proof. We have the traveler's testimony. We can try to find others like him. Maybe we can locate more free folk who crossed south recently. If we compile enough first-hand accounts, the lords might believe us. Or at least they'll be on guard. Peter tapped a finger against his chin. I'll dispatch scouts north toward the wall. Discreet men used to moving in harsh terrain. They'll gather what information they can. I'll also send inquiries to some of my contacts in the Night's Watch. If the Watch is indeed preparing for war against an undead horde, they'll say something. Sansa nodded, squaring her shoulders. Do it. We'll proceed carefully, but we must proceed. She invited the wildling traveler to stay within Winterfell's protective walls, giving him food and shelter. She quietly gathered any other refugees from north of the wall who had strayed into Winterfell's orbit, instructing Maester Wolkan and the stewards to document their stories. Bit by bit, a picture emerged of fear and flight. A few insisted they had encountered White Walkers firsthand. Others spoke of fleeing simply because of the rumors. But none spoke with the easy dismissiveness of a liar. Each told their tale with trembling or haunted eyes, reminiscent of those who had stared into something beyond mortal comprehension. Weeks later, Peter's scouts returned with uncertain news. Some had ridden as far as Castle Black, only to find the gates closed. The watch was not speaking openly of any undead threat, but the men on the ramparts looked grim, and rumors abounded that the Lord Commander, whoever held the title, was preparing for the worst. One scout swore he saw an unusual glow in the night sky far to the north, a cold, eerie shimmer. Another brought back word from free folk near the southern edges of the wall, telling the same stories of the dead on the march. None of this was conclusive, but it deepened the sense that something terrible was coming. Sansa convened a secret council of her most trusted northern lords, alongside the Vale Knights who commanded Winterfell's garrison. She insisted on absolute confidentiality, inviting no more than 2 or 3 lords who had proven themselves loyal: Wyman Manderly's representative, Lord Serwyn, and Lady Dustin, though the last with some hesitation. In the council chamber, under the watch of only a few guards, she and Peter laid out the warnings. Some scoffed, calling it a superstition or a ploy, but Sansa's calm insistence and Peter's strategic explanation had an effect. Lord Serwyn, who had seen too much war to dismiss any threat lightly, nodded in solemn agreement that they should be prepared. Manderly's steward looked troubled, reluctant to credit such outlandish tales but unwilling to risk ignoring them. Lady Dustin was the hardest to read, her expression stony, but in the end she said, "If this is a stark concern, I'll stand with Winterfell. But I pray this is all a false alarm." When the meeting ended, Sansa felt both relieved and uneasy. She had taken the first step in rallying the North for a threat that might still be regarded as fairy tales by many. If the White Walkers truly came, they might find themselves unprepared anyway. But if they overprepared and the threat never arrived, she would face questions and potential ridicule. The risk was great either way, yet she could not in good conscience do nothing. Days passed, turning into weeks. Spring's arrival became clearer, with patches of green emerging beneath the snow. Peter oversaw shipments of grain from the Vale, quietly stockpiling more than usual. Sansa directed blacksmiths to forge additional arrowheads and spears. A hush fell over Winterfell, a sense of waiting. The small folk carried on, most ignorant of the reasons behind these preparations. The guards, however, sharpened their vigilance, scanning the horizon for foes both living and dead. Then, on a brisk morning near the start of what should have been a warmer season, a raven arrived, bearing the seal of the Night's Watch. Sansa and Peter read the message together, hearts pounding. The letter was brief, matter-of-fact. It stated that the Watch had spotted an army of whites beyond the wall, seemingly under the command of White Walkers. They urged every lord loyal to the realm to prepare for war and, if possible, send aid to the wall. The signature at the bottom was not that of a maester, but rather the Lord Commander's, Ed Tollett. Beneath that, a hastily scrawled postscript read, "We have heard rumors of Jon Snow, once Lord Commander, gone south to plead for aid. If you have means to contact him or to aid us, do so soon. The threat is real. The wall cannot hold forever." Sansa set the parchment aside, her hand trembling slightly. She looked at Peter, a swirl of emotions in her eyes: fear, determination, the faint glimmer of hope that maybe Jon was alive. "We must call the banners," she said softly, her voice steady despite the dread. "Not just to fight some southern war, but to defend our home against the dead." Peter nodded, face unusually grave. "We will. But this is a vast undertaking, Sansa. We'll need to rally every northern house, even the ones that are reluctant to believe. We'll need supplies, weapons, a command structure, and we must consider the possibility of an alliance with whoever holds power in the south, Lannisters or Targaryens. Alone, the North cannot stand against a legion of the dead." She pressed her lips together. "We do what we must. If Daenerys Targaryen has dragons, those dragons might be the only chance the living have against an army that doesn't fear steel or arrows. We must reach out." He agreed. "It's a gamble, but these are desperate times. Let me handle the couriers, the messages. You gather the northern lords. If some refuse to believe, We'll have to use every bit of persuasion and pressure we have." Sansa took a deep breath. The knowledge that she was about to plunge the North into a mobilization it had not seen since the War of the Five Kings weighed on her. But there was no alternative she could accept. "We gather the lords here at Winterfell for a grand council. Tell them it's a matter of the kingdom's survival." Peter bowed his head in agreement. "It shall be done, my lady." Thus began a flurry of activity. Ravens were dispatched to every corner of the north, summoning lords small and great to Winterfell to discuss a crisis that transcended petty politics. The fortress bustled with preparations for hosting a large assembly. Cooks and servants worked day and night to store enough provisions for the influx of guests. Weapons were polished, new armor hammered out. Peter organized special quarters for visiting lords, ensuring that they were placed in areas of the castle where they could be discreetly watched. He also sent coded messages to the Vale, hinting that their involvement was crucial to ward off a looming danger, one that, if it spread, would eventually threaten their own mountain strongholds. Few might believe at first, but the Vale had so far profited from the North's resurgence. Perhaps that loyalty would hold. One by one, northern houses answered the call. Lord Glover arrived from Deepwood Motte, face grim with old memories of war. Lord Manderley came from White Harbor, complaining about the inconvenience yet bringing a stout retinue of knights. The Serwins, Tallhearts, Locks, and more trickled in, curiosity or duty driving them to the Stark stronghold. A hush fell over the great keep as lords began to sense the seriousness of the summons. Sansa greeted each with a measured courtesy, occasionally flanked by Peter, who wore the practiced smile of a host but rarely let slip any detail of the looming conversation. Only when the halls were nearly bursting with guests did Sansa call for the Grand Council to convene in the Great Hall. It was a tense gathering. Torches burned along the walls, their flames casting long shadows over the assembled lords. The dais was arranged for Sansa and Peter, with seats for the most senior bannermen close by. Once the hall settled into a quiet murmur, Sansa rose. She wore a dark gray gown trimmed with fur, and her red hair was braided in a single plait, reminiscent of simpler times. The hush grew, all eyes on her. "My lords and ladies," she began, voice calm but resonant in the spacious hall, "I have called you here because the North faces a threat like none we have known in living memory. I do not speak of armies from the south, nor Ironborn raiders, nor pockets of rebels. I speak of an enemy far more dangerous, one that does not tire, does not bargain, and does not fear. The White Walkers and their army of the dead." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged uneasy glances, others folded their arms skeptically. Lord Glover looked unconvinced, but he did not interrupt. Sansa continued, "We have received ravens from the Night's Watch and refugees from beyond the wall who attest to the reality of this threat. They bring accounts of whites, reanimated corpses, and pale figures who command them. If Castle Black and the other fortifications along the wall fail, those monsters will sweep into the north, killing and raising their victims to bolster their ranks. No holdfast will be spared." At that, a collective shiver passed through some of the crowd. The mention of the dead rising was an old, half-forgotten terror in the north. But still, a few lords grumbled that it could not be so. Sansa gestured for the wildling traveler to step forward as he had agreed to speak. Though he looked nervous, he shared his first-hand account, describing what he'd witnessed beyond the wall. Some in the crowd scoffed, others listened with growing horror. When he finished, Peter Baelish rose, scanning the hall with a cool gaze. "I understand your skepticism," Peter said. "We too were doubtful. Yet the evidence continues to mount. The Night's Watch has openly declared that the dead are on the move. The risk is clear. If the wall is breached, the North will become a battlefield the likes of which we've never imagined. All our victories, all our rebuilding will be for nothing. The living must unite against the dead." Lord Glover raised his hand. "This is madness, my lady. We've all heard the old stories, but we live in a world of steel and men. Show us these dead if you expect us to believe we must send our troops north." Sansa met his gaze without flinching. "I wish I could show you, but the threat lies beyond the wall. If we wait until they're at our doorstep, it will be too late. The Night's Watch begs for our aid. If the ancient enemy is truly upon us, we must not abandon them." Murmuring spread through the hall, some voices in agreement, others in fearful denial. Lord Manderley rose to speak in his booming tone, weighing the cost of mobilization. Others questioned how they would feed so many men so far north. Peter interjected that they had been stockpiling supplies for months, anticipating trouble. He offered logistical plans for ferrying provisions from White Harbor up the King's Road to Castle Black. Each question had an answer, though not all were satisfied. For 2 tense hours, the debate raged. Some lords expressed outright disbelief and accused Lady Sansa of chasing phantoms. A handful, mindful of House Stark's legacy, pledged support immediately, trusting in the seriousness of her warning. In the end, it was Sansa's quiet conviction that began to sway the majority. She spoke of her father's honor, reminding them that Eddard Stark had once believed in these tales enough to store dragonglass weapons at Dragonstone, an anecdote gleaned from old records, half-remembered. Her voice cut through the crowd's muttering, appealing to their sense of duty and the memory of an untainted Stark legacy. Finally, Lord Glover rose again, gaze grim. "Very well, Lady Stark. If you are certain and if the Night's Watch truly calls for aid, then Deepwood Motte will answer. I cannot speak for every house, but I will not stand idle if the dead truly come." One by one, other lords added their grudging, uncertain support, though some made it clear they remained skeptical. Sansa thanked them for their willingness to heed the warning, adding that should their fears prove unfounded, she alone would bear the responsibility. That humble acceptance of blame eased some lingering resentment. Peter, meanwhile, stood at her side, letting her take the moral lead. He sensed that this was a moment for the Stark name to shine, for the memory of Ned Stark to bind the North together one last time. When the council adjourned, many lords left to drink or to brood, wrestling with the enormity of what they had heard. Peter caught sight of Lady Dustin lingering near the corner, her gaze fixed on Sansa with a calculating intensity. He approached her carefully. She turned to him, lips curling in a sardonic half-smile. "It's rather amusing," she said, her voice pitched low so others wouldn't hear. "All these warriors gather, trembling at fairy tales of the dead. And you, Lord Baelish, stand beside Lady Stark as if these stories truly matter to you. A year ago, you were set on forging alliances to bolster your own power. Now you're spearheading a campaign against nightmares?" Peter maintained a polite expression. "Sometimes, my lady, nightmares become reality. If we do nothing, the realm may drown in blood. My power means little if we're all dead by winter's end." She gave a brittle laugh. "Oh, you always know how to twist words to serve your purpose. Just remember, if this is all a grand lie or an exaggeration, you'll owe many apologies, assuming the North doesn't turn on you." He inclined his head. "Duly noted, my lady. But I suspect we'll both do what must be done to survive." Her eyes flicked to Sansa, who was now surrounded by several lords, each asking questions. "The girl does have her father's presence, doesn't she? At times, I even catch a glimpse of her mother in her face." Peter kept his tone neutral. "Yes, she does." Lady Dustin's gaze returned to Peter, her voice dropping to a purr of condescension. "Be careful, Lord Baelish. Winterfell is a strong fortress, but the illusions you spin are fragile as spider silk. One fierce gust and they tear." He gave a polite bow, forcing a slight smile. "Thank you for your concern, Lady Dustin. I'll keep it in mind." She left, her cloak trailing over the stone floor. Peter watched her go, well aware that while she had pledged nominal support, she remained one of the more dangerous figures in the North, unpredictable, harboring old grudges, cunning in her own right. Still, he was confident he could navigate around her. He had done so thus far, and Sansa's moral authority seemed to keep Dustin's resentment at bay, at least for the moment. In the days that followed, preparations accelerated. Houses that had pledged men began sending out calls to their bannermen. A muster was planned near the last hearth, the seat of the Umbers, though their line was scattered after the wars with the Boltons. A few branches of the family still survived. From there, the plan was to march to Castle Black with provisions or to hold the area if the Watch's position fell. Peter oversaw the logistics, ensuring wagons of grain and weaponry departed in waves, each protected by armed escorts. Sansa pored over maps, coordinating with the leading lords. The grand design started to take shape, the North's combined forces defending the wall against an inhuman enemy. Even so, seeds of doubt lingered. Some lords might arrive late or with fewer soldiers than promised. Many suspected this was a fool's errand, that the White Walkers were legends best left in the old stories. Yet the months of prosperity under Sansa and Peter had forged a respect strong enough to push them along, even if grudgingly. The scale of what they were undertaking awed Sansa whenever she stepped back to think about it. They were effectively rallying the North into a defensive war not against men but against the undead. In that sense, it was bigger than any Game of Thrones. Peter's quiet machinations, aligning house loyalties, funneling resources, offering subtle bribes where needed, were all second nature to him, but even he seemed haunted by the enormity of the threat. Meanwhile, they dispatched ravens to Dragonstone or wherever Daenerys Targaryen might be found, offering to discuss an alliance to defeat the White Walkers. Couriers traveled south with carefully worded letters explaining that the North recognized the threat from beyond the wall and that if the Targaryens truly desired to claim the realm, they would need to stand with the North in this dire hour. Whether the letters would reach Daenerys or whether she would respond remained uncertain. But Sansa could not ignore the possibility that dragons might be the key to victory or that her own brother Jon might already be working to secure the Targaryen queen's aid. Amid the swirl of events, Sansa and Peter found little time for private discussions. Their days were consumed by councils, inspections, and farewells to marching columns of soldiers. Yet each night, they might cross paths in some quiet corridor or gather briefly by the library hearth to review the next wave of orders. In those moments, they caught glimpses of each other's weariness. The ambition that had once fueled Peter's every step now took a back seat to the immediate crisis. The sense of guiding a realm toward survival overshadowed thoughts of personal gain, though Peter never truly set those aside. Likewise, Sansa's compassion, which had steered her gently but firmly through the North's recovery, now flared into urgency. She often remembered her mother's stories of the long night, of heroes like the last hero. Now, it seemed they were living in a new legend in the making, where the entire realm's fate hung on uncertain battles yet to be fought. One evening, as the moon glowed faintly through a haze of clouds, Peter found Sansa alone in the great hall. She stood before the ancient direwolf banners, gazing at them as if seeking strength from her ancestors. He approached quietly, footsteps echoing. "You should rest," he suggested softly. "Tomorrow is another long day." She turned, eyes distant. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see armies of the dead marching on Winterfell, or I see the hall filled with empty armor and broken swords." He reached out, tentatively resting a hand on her arm. She didn't pull away. "We're doing all we can. If the White Walkers come, we won't face them alone. Not this time. The North stands united, largely because of you." She looked up at him, her expression weary but resolute. "Because of us. I may have the Stark name, but your planning has held everything together. Even now, you're the one orchestrating supply lines, sending out spies, forging alliances. I don't resent you for it. Not anymore. I understand it's necessary." He studied her face, her sincerity evident. "We've come a long way from King's Landing, haven't we?" he said quietly. "Those days seem like another life." "They do," she agreed. A moment passed, heavy with the unspoken knowledge of all they had lost, all they had sacrificed. Then she drew a breath. "Peter, if we survive this, if the realm emerges from this threat, do you still dream of sitting on the Iron Throne?" He paused, honesty and calculation warring within him. Finally, he gave a faint smile. "I once did. Perhaps I still harbor ambitions. But I find, as the years pass, that survival and a measure of power close at hand can be enough. Ruling from King's Landing is a precarious seat. Ruling from Winterfell has suited me. And it has suited you, hasn't it?" Sansa's lips curved in a small, sad smile. "Yes, more than I expected." Her gaze shifted back to the banner. "We should focus on surviving. Maybe that's all we can allow ourselves to dream of now." He bowed his head in agreement. "Then let's do what we must." They stood there for a moment longer, neither quite sure what to say next, until a distant clamor broke the quiet. Guards escorting a late-arriving group of Umbers, voices echoing in the courtyard. With a final, shared glance, they parted ways. Tomorrow would bring fresh demands, fresh challenges, and each day that passed brought the rumored army of the dead one step closer to the wall. Sansa ascended the stairs to her chamber, feeling the old stones beneath her feet. She remembered climbing these same steps as a child, her mind filled with frivolous dreams of gallant knights and southern courts. Now those dreams were ash, and in their place stood the stark reality of a land on the brink of catastrophe. Yet in that reality, she had carved out a role as Lady of Winterfell, a figurehead of honor and survival, even if her partner in governance was the cunning Peter Baelish. Their bond, forged in necessity and sharpened by adversity, was all that stood between the North and chaos. That night, a cold wind howled over the battlements, whispering of an approaching darkness. Within the walls, men and women sharpened swords, repaired armor, and drank quietly in the corners, whispering tales of the undead. The old gods watched from their weirwood trees, silent as ever, while new alliances and old loyalties braced themselves for the oncoming storm. And at the center of it all, Sansa Stark and Peter Baelish lay awake in their respective chambers, each wrestling with the knowledge that, for the North to survive the winter that was truly coming, they would have to stand together, wolf and mockingbird, against a night that threatened to devour the living and turn them all into silent, frozen wraiths of a lost age. Outside, the moon hung low, half-shrouded by clouds. Snow began to fall again, softly blanketing the courtyard. But the hearts of those within Winterfell burned with a rare determination, a flickering flame that would not die easily. If the stories were true, if the dead truly marched, then this was but the calm before a storm that might change the course of history. And no matter what shape that storm took, Sansa Stark and Peter Baelish had woven themselves into the fabric of the North's destiny, tied by vows, ambition, and the unyielding need to keep their people alive.